Now it's time to compare S&P 500 with the Fidelity US Quality Income ETF. You might be wondering, why am I comparing them at all and what are the commonalities between them? And this is a question I will answer shortly. But first, let's check the results. After that, I will show you the 4 ways FUSD is way better than the S&P 500 in my opinion. Starting with the total returns. Just a note, I will be using the BlackRock ETF on the S&P 500, which is why you will see ticker symbol IVV. The 1-year total return for the S&P 500 ETF is 26.27%, the 3-year 9.97% annually, and the 5-year 15.65%. For FUSD, those numbers are 19.16% for 1 year, 15.35% for the past 3, and 14.13% for the past 5 years. For the total returns, I will compare the cumulative returns of the funds since March 27, 2017, since this is when FUSD was created. As we compare the two ETFs, we can see that the S&P 500 leads in the periods except for the past 3 years, in which FUSD dominates with 15.35% versus 9.97% for the S&P. Now, let's turn our attention to the dividend increases. For the S&P 500 for the past 12 months, the dividend was raised by 7.91%, 5.30% for the past 3 years, and 4.44% for the past 5. For FUSD, the numbers are 5.26%, 5.56%, and 12.70% respectively. This is where you can see the quality factor coming into play. Over the past 5 years, the Fidelity US Quality Income ETF has increased its payments to its shareholders roughly 3 times more than the S&P 500. The reason I'm not going back more is that FUSD had its full year of full dividend payments in 2018 for the first time. Next, we go to the current dividend yield. For IVV, it is 1.33%, while FUSD's dividend is 2.20%. This is one of the big advantages of FUSD. Now, it might not seem like much of a difference, but remember, the difference between 1.33 and 2.2 isn't 87 basis points, it's 65%. This means that by investing in FUSD, you get 65% more current income on your money than you do by investing in the S&P 500. This obviously is a result of the fact that only dividend-paying companies are allowed in FUSD, while the same is not true for the S&P. The next important metric I want to look at is the max drawdown year. Since 2017, the worst year for both funds was the bear market in 2022. This is a great example which can show us how vulnerable the ETF is to market downturns. The S&P ETF lost 18.13%, while FUSD only 5.25%. This to me shows the bigger resilience and higher quality I get when investing in the Fidelity fund. The expense ratio for any major S&P 500 ETF you can find will be, of course, lower. For IVV, it's just 0.03%, while for the European domiciled and smaller FUSD, it is 0.25%. It's obvious that S&P 500 wins here, but I wouldn't worry too much since this is already reflected in all of the performance data we discussed. When it comes to holdings, the S&P 500 obviously has 500 companies in it, although, as pointed out, sometimes they are 507 and I have no idea why. For FUSD, the holdings are a lot less at 118 currently. Obviously, the S&P 500 has more companies, but 118 stocks isn't a small number at all. If you're finding value in this video, press the like button and subscribe by clicking the notification bell. That way you will be notified directly when I upload new videos instead of waiting for the algorithm to show them to you. So now you might be asking yourself, why did I choose to compare these ETFs at all, and which are the 4 ways FUSD is better than the S&P 500? Well, the first similarity is the top sector. Both funds are overly exposed to tech, with the S&P having 30.84% in tech, while FUSD has even more at 35.56%. The next sectors, although not in the same order, are fairly similar. If you look at them side by side, the only notable difference is that in FUSD the communication sector is not well represented, whereas in the S&P 500 it is 9%. This is mainly because Alphabet and Meta are there, and one of them doesn't pay a dividend, while the other started only recently and probably still has not had the time to be included in the index reconstruction at the time of recording this. The next reason is that they often move in one direction in the same market conditions. When one goes up, I have observed the other does too, and it's logical having in mind the fact that both have the biggest USA companies in them. However, what you need to know is that when they go up, the S&P goes up more, and when they go down, it goes down a lot more. However, the amount the S&P goes up more with is less than the amount with which it falls, but I'll talk about that in a second. Third reason I wanted to compare them are that both funds rely mainly on capital gains for their returns, despite the fact that FUSD is a dividend-oriented one. So with all that said, I think it is normal to compare the two funds and perhaps view as redundant to have large chunk of both in a portfolio. To check the full video where I compare FUSD and S&P 500, where I give more details about each of these ETFs, click on the video on your screen right here.